I have found options and small cap trading to be incredibly different in a great, wonderful way. And I don't think that I'll ever go back, unfortunately. It's called the Penny Lane Podcast. It's supposed to be a penny stocks trader, but like, I don't know. I just have really found my home in the options.
Yeah, that's where I'm always going to be at moving forward. I know that I'll make a transition to futures in the future.
In the future.
And we have a lot of really successful futures traders in Moneyline, and they're always in my ear to come over to the dark side, they say, but
Yeah.
that's for the future because yeah, there was a mass exodus from small caps to options, and I think that when I was going through that process, I just asked myself, if I was going to treat this like a business because it is, how could I scale it the most effective manner long term so that consistent profitability can be something that's attainable on a week in and week out basis? And when I realized I could, take 10, 20, 30% base hits on large cap options pretty much no matter the season, and there's typically always volume somewhere in large caps, and I just don't think I'll ever go back to getting hit with offerings ever again. But
Totally. So you mentioned QQQ.
mhm,
What's your, Dr. Bullshark loves the Qs. The
yeah.
Qs made him a millionaire. What's
Mhm.
your bread and butter stock?
QQQ as well. So I actually have a pretty, I don't want to necessarily say unique trading style, but I don't see many people trade the way that I do. If you're in Moneyline and you listen to this, I stress the term naked trading all the time because I use no indicators when I trade. I watch a 15 and 5 minute price chart, which is pretty common, but I strictly trade supply and demand zones with no indicators, no outside. I don't watch news. I don't look at anything like that. I strictly trade price action. And the cues are my bread and butter as well because when tech moves smoothly, it's pretty darn easy to trade, to be honest.
Cool. Very cool. So do you ever like if tech is moving well, will you ever break off into like an Apple or a Microsoft, or you just you're like if one thing's moving, they're all like cues are easier.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that so a big part of my trading process that I think people are interested in, and that they really wanted to hear me talk about is the level of patience and discipline and dedication to my system and to a mindset and a philosophy about trading that I just try to live day in and day out. So I really stress to people like, I watch the indices first to get confirmation of taking trades on equities. It's how I learned how to trade. I need to see strength in the broader market before I look at individual names to trade them. And it's not necessarily that that is the right way to trade, it's just that that's the way that works for me. So if SPY and QQQ are flat on the day, I don't necessarily feel the need to trade anything else because the broader market isn't ranging today. And taking 0 to 2 setups per day, taking really high quality setups with options with size on the indices and managing risk effectively is really typically where I stay because I really like to emphasize the concept of silencing noise because I tell people in Discord all the time that a lot of their issues are that complexity is the enemy of execution. Um, they're overcomplicating their process, and in the trading process daily, they're thinking all day. They're thinking about what they should be doing, thinking about their rules, and thinking about, oh, I missed this setup and I missed that setup. But I personally just don't care if I miss any setups because I know over time that it's not my job to stress over all the setups I miss. It's really just my job to manage risk over a series of trades and the setups that work for my system.
By accessing this podcast, you acknowledge that the Penny Lane podcast makes no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast should not be considered professional or financial advice. Unless specifically stated otherwise, the Penny Lane podcast does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement. The third-party materials or content of any third-party site referenced in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the opinions, standards, or policies of the Penny Lane podcast. The Penny Lane podcast assumes no responsibility or liability for the accuracy or completeness of the content contained in third-party materials or on third-party sites referenced in this podcast, or the compliance with applicable laws of such materials and/or links referenced herein.